So hello everyone, welcome here at another practicing session. It's Monday evening, 7:30 p.m. and if things are possible, we are live here at the Frenzel piano playing some Beethoven most of the time with you in the framework of the Beethoven project. That's the project in which I'm going to record starting end of this year most of the works of Beethoven, solo works of Beethoven, 60 in total on 22 CDs. So that's a really exciting project. And in these practicing sessions, I am actually sharing with you the way to that moment, to those recording sessions. And so we will not only play music that I have studied, but I will be studying along with you also music that is new for me. 7:30 on Monday p.m. here, Brussels time, and Thursdays at the clavichord at the same time. Most of those sessions will be pre-recorded. And go in YouTube Premiere. So with the same kind of community tool, so to say, as we have here. Today, we are looking into Sonata number 3 of Beethoven, C major. So that's the opus 2, number 3. And then we're going to play and try out some things on the Scherzo, which is the third part. Not too long of a movement, but really, really beautiful. It's an amazing piece. And I'm looking forward to see how this works because this is a relatively new piece for me. So that's all coming up. And so, as always, I will be welcoming the people who are here now on the live stream. Hope that everything works because last week we had so much troubles. Technically, live streams are always challenging. There's always something that can go wrong. It's the internet connection or it's just a computer that is doing things that is not actually calculating fast enough according to YouTube's settings, and then the stream quality is bad. Today I was prepared for the worst, so I've set up everything 3 hours in advance to only notice 20 minutes before the live stream started that the internet connection suddenly disappeared. So we had some fixing to be done here, which we did, and I hope everything is okay. Okay, see if the chat works, because that's the first thing. Yeah, I think it does. So Anya's in the chat. She is moderating as always. That's my wife, in case you are new here. I saw Jonathan already tuning in early. That's great, because if the live stream is announced, actually the chat box is open. You can always check if I plan to announce these live streams a few days ahead, but I've not always the time to make the thumbnail. That's actually everything that it requires to make, just a thumbnail, and then activate the live stream, give it a title and a little bit of the description. But sometimes, well, that's just done a few hours before the live stream. But then when the live stream is announced, the community or the chat is open. So Jonathan, I saw you already there with Rock 95. That's great. So there's Anya. I see Michael Walter. Always great to see you. Hope everything is well. Sina from Gothenburg, photographer. Great to see your name again. Also Stefan. That's great. John is here. He's also moderating. And Joseph, hi to you. And Jason Neoff as well. Jason, I have to thank you especially for the idea of the digitally adjusted recordings. Actually, Jason is the one who gave me the idea and we worked that out. So that's a great idea. I think hearing the symphonies, like the third symphony, for me actually for the first time really that intense, because I'm not avoiding that music, but I want to keep the experience fresh, so to say. So the Beethoven symphonies, as other symphonic works, is something I don't listen to a lot, if not to say actually not. So this third symphony was for me a really long time. It was a discovery from that really made my day. That's the reason why I shared those recordings with you, and we're going to continue with that. I saw some really nice comments also, people who will try out to do this kind of completely digital, so from MuseScore. I don't know all these programs, so I'm really excited that we have started with this series of whole beat impressions, because that's it all about. This channel is all about sharing that journey with you. What happens when you take the metronome and those metronome indications that those people left, those composers, those musicians, they were actually colleagues of ours, and they give their tempo indications, which we actually en masse, to use a French word, neglect. Uh, of course, you cannot say that. It's a weird thing, actually. I'm not going to make too long of an introduction here, but it's a weird thing if you think about it, that if you talk about metronome numbers, there are, in the mainstream music world, so to say, a lot of people who raise their fingers and say, well, talking about metronome numbers, how unmusical is that? Sorry, Mr. Frenzel. But on the other hand, if you say something about the metronome numbers that's a little bit against what the mainstream, let's say, performance practice of today does, then they're using the metronome numbers to say, oh, you cannot change those because we know how it works. So it's actually, you cannot have it both ways. So that's a weird thing. But that's all we, well, we do a lot of things more on the channel, but it's actually foundation under the Beethoven project to see what people of that generation, and also Beethoven, of course, but we're looking then in the first place for the piano sonatas and the works that Beethoven wrote for solo keyboard, to metronome numbers from Czerny and Moscheles, who both have known Beethoven, and their metronome numbers are really interesting. Sometimes there is a difference, but overall their metronome numbers are quite similar to each other. And the remarkable thing about that, and then we're going to dive into the Beethoven sonata, is that, you know, Moscheles actually commented on that. So in the Schindler biography, the first English print, which was edited or published in 1841 in London, Moscheles made the annotated that biography, and where Schindler criticizes Czerny and Moscheles in a weird way, because some pages later he actually made a clear statement that both musicians, well, are very reliable sources for the works of Beethoven. But anyway, on that particular page, Moscheles writes that his metronome numbers actually are not so far from Czerny's, which he was a very pleasant surprise. So he actually acknowledges not only his own metronome numbers, but also those of Czerny. And that's actually, well, how much closer do you want to get to that music? So I don't know if Anya's listening now, but I see her mother coming to our front door, and that's my mother-in-law. She's 88. She's a lovely woman, but she will not understand that I'm live streaming, and I hope the door is closed. And if not, you will hear her. The door is closed. So probably if Anya listens, she's coming down for a moment. So in other words, and if she's not, just type it into the chat that she has to come down. Hello, Christian. Nice to have you here. Okay, so, and now it's a little bit strange because I see her and she sees me. So Anya's mother is greeting me, but she will not understand that it's difficult for me to come down. So hopefully Anya listens. Okay, guys, I just continue with that, with the Beethoven sonata. Those things happen during a live stream. It's something different than a pre-recorded session, but sometimes a live stream is really challenging. So you have a studio, there will be a red light at the door at the entrance of the recording room saying I'm busy. So anyway, there we go. So by the way, if you have questions, leave them in the chat, and I'm coming back in the chat as always. It will be 30 minutes I think for this scherzo, and then we can hang out a little bit answering or just sharing thoughts and impressions. And if you have questions for me that I miss, I will take note of them and bring them to me as we end this live stream. So if you do not have the time to stay for 30 or 45 minutes, then the chances might be there that I have to answer the end of the live stream. So you can always come back because there is a replay possibility that YouTube offers after these live streams have been streamed. So, well, now do something simpler than just talk in English about an introduction. There's Anya. There's a bus. Yeah, everything goes wrong today. So I hope the piano will be fine at the end of the live stream, so I'm just taking my headphone. I think it's this microphone. That's it. Okay. And if you would ask me how is that possible, I don't know. So actually, yeah, there it is again. It's a connection, but it's actually, this is one of my best cables. So that's being live.
Okay.
Your mother was at the door.
Yes, I know. I've talked to her.
Okay, great.
And when I get back, I get the noise.
And she's 88 years, so we have to take care a little bit of her. So she's really important for us. If I listen to my voice now here through this microphone, through this headphone, it's actually amazing. This is a really great microphone. It's not really expensive, but this on YouTube is so heavily compressed that's actually, it's too bad. I'm okay. I hope this holds. If not, Anya will come back. I just have to touch it. It's, I don't know what causes this. Okay, now Mr. Beethoven is waiting. Okay. Sound okay? No, it was not the switches. That has to do with this, with the contact. I will use another our cable next week. But normally these cables give. These cables actually I use to digitize the. For instance, the tape recordings of the partitas. These cables are used for that. They're not so long. There's 1 meter or 2 meters, but they're rather expensive. So normally shouldn't happen. And I will put my. So I will listen from time to time. Here. There we go. So Tactus inequalis here. 76 we have in this Simrock edition for this Scherzo. So you know, this edition, I would love to have them all, but they're really hard to find. That's the last Czerny edition. So 76. So that's of course 2 ticks for a ternary system. So what they did was, so what I do, and I'm practicing that, I promised you that, chuck, chuck. So just follow the metronome, chuck, 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 and 1, and 2, and 1, and 2, and 3, and so there you have the tactus inequalis. Instead of going equal, tactus equalis, tuck, 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 but I have to admit sometimes it's difficult, certainly for these pieces where you would say, well, I could use a conductor conducting in quarter notes. So for instance, for the last movement, we will do that next week. It's much easier to convert from this binary ticks to the ternary ones. Going back from 3 to 2 is actually very easy. So it's a matter of practice. So these metronome numbers like these were not meant to be used while practicing. That's the thing that Moscheles kind of is not completely meant when he said, well, these metronome numbers are only for the beginning. He also meant, of course, a little fluctuation of tempo that you always have. We are no machines. That quote is, of course, heavily misused in today's explanation for half beat, that you can do whatever you want. And if that little sentence wasn't written, they would, people who defend or who believe really that these metronome numbers are to be read as we do today, they would have really a trouble, because you really need to pull the brake, so to say, often, if you want to even think about reconstructing these tempi based on half beat or single beat, so where every tick represents a note value. But let's stick to our tactus inequalis here. Pam, pam, tam, ti, tam, ti. That's actually the way you would conduct this. Jump, and you have this. we continue in a minute. What's actually nice if you use this feeling, jung, dang, and then you understand also why it is so important, why actually these metronome numbers, well, they have a really long tradition from conducting, in fact, as well. It's not that simple, but actually, and basically it's that simple. But if you have this feeling, yum, dum, da, you feel this three tact really, really in a better way than when you would have dum, dum, bum, ding, dum, dum, ding, dum, bum, rum, bum, dum, dum, bum, bum, dum. By the way, if you would replace this metronome by a pendulum, Tactus inequalis is no problem. You can play, everyone can play. It's not a matter of playing 3 against 2. The pendulum gives so much room in the swing that it's actually amazing. You should try it out, and you can do it with an apple. I demonstrated that. So it's amazing how much room the pendulum leaves for our eyes to really take the tempo. So you can use it as, binary ticks, so 2 ticks, 1, or you can use it young. So it's you have to try it out. And now we play the scherzo. So yeah, isn't that great? I'm just checking on the chat. Okay. I see Jonathan asked for Claire de Lune. You mean the Moonlight Sonata? I have a surprise for you. It's coming tomorrow. That's a recording for tomorrow. And I worked a long time on editing that, more than on recording. So I hope you like that. I think it's a nice recording with the moderator. So this is by far not finished, but you see this movement is in there already. And I think that's what I'm sharing now is not something that I know for sure, but it's my experience that with this tactus inequalis, when you really have this, so this 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, that you really have this feeling, heavy beat on one, and it makes sense, of course, because it's a 3/4 time signature. It's a scherzo, so it's very close to the waltz tempo as well. Czerny's waltz tempo is 88 for the dotted half note, which is a tempo that you find everywhere. So this is a little bit slower than that, not too much. And at the end is so nice, and listen to the dissonances that you get here. Now with the G. It's so delicate. So this whole style of Vienna at the time, it's all about delicacy. It's all about refinement. I now let us see pianissimo now. There's no ritardando here, which is interesting. So I'm not saying that Beethoven would necessarily have written ritardando there at the end. If he wanted, here is at the last page movement, there is a rallentando. I'm just looking here. It's of course Czerny's edition. He doesn't add too much, but of course he adds a little bit sometimes, which makes this edition so unbelievably useful. And I cannot repeat it enough that this is not just digitally everywhere on the internet. That's a sign that we actually are not really interested, I think, in how these people play that music, because here there's so much information. Sometimes you have little bows, little accents that he adds. Okay, we can criticize that, but he gave us his most honest and I think also in a way integer vision on the way he saw Beethoven works to be performed. He even didn't change things according to Czerny, what he wrote in the pianoforte school. You will see tomorrow with the Moonlight Sonata that I'm playing with the pedal, so with the damping pedal completely open, hold it all the time. It's possible. He writes in the pianoforte school, Czerny, that for later pianos, so after 1830, 1840, the sound is so much more powerful in a way, but also heavier and thicker in a way that it's no longer possible to have the dampers open all the piece. So he recommends changing pedaling actually while changing harmonies, but he doesn't add that in the score. So he respects Beethoven's original wish. So that's actually amazing. But here at the end, no ritardando, which is fantastic, of course, but it's difficult on this piano, also on the Fritz, to play that soft. So let's try that. It must disappear in nothing. So you see the slightest hesitation here when and it's over. This movement that you have had during the whole piece, you start to feel that, and nothing should interfere, I think. So that coming at the end with the bass here, should hold it as one hesitation, and that feeling is you're taking as you'll be thinking as a listener outside this cloud of actually kind of hypnotic feeling of rhythmical feeling. It's perpetuum mobile. You can have this piano little, so that's too much. So you can have it makes this this deep sound suddenly. So these pianos, these Viennese pianos, they have leather. So the hammerheads are covered not with felt but with leather, and I will make those videos. There's a difference here in this piano and in the Fritz. So this piano is much. The Fritz is much more back to the early 19th century. It's much more brilliant actually, brilliant in the way of more upper tones, overtones. And this piano is covered with more layers of leather, which darkens the sound a little bit. But not saying that that is per se something from 1820. It's the sound that most often these kind of pianos are brought into. If you made the lettering thinner here, you will end up having a piano like the Fritz. So, and vice versa, you can easily turn this Fritz into a Frenzel. So there's actually not so much that we know, as I learned from Joris, that is explicitly written about how these hammerheads were covered and what kind of leather they used and how thick, because every layer of leather you add another layer of sound. It's a different color. And so, but all these pianos will have in common that if you go just a little bit stronger on the key, so a little bit more mezzo forte or forte, this changes sound. So instead of, and you can do that. Even pianissimo, you can give a little bit more. The transparency will always be there too. So let's check tempo now. Let's see if it still are. And it's okay. Just double check. Yeah, so that's okay. I think tempo should be very stable here. Okay, if you then start from the beginning again, there is this, and I honestly don't know if that's a Beethoven thing. I should have checked that before. I think it is. So these dashes on the notes, on the quarter note. So he wants to have the notes, sure, yeah, sure it is, but then you have the bow, so these notes are tied together with the bow, and then the bow ends at a G, which actually means that you are supposed to make an articulation gap between the G and the A. We have talked about that last week in the session with the Adagio, how difficult it sometimes is to do that, because you have the natural wish to bring that melody over the bar line, so to say. But I think, and the more I read about that, it's also for me a path of discovery, actually. The more I think they were serious about is that even in those long melodies, they wanted to have the accentuated accent, how do you say that? So the pattern of accents always right. So at the beginning of the bar, you give an accent. At the beginning of a melody, you give an accent, and so on. So you give an accent by not only by making a dynamic differentiation, so playing from forte, from pianissimo, then mezzo forte, so to really make that note stand out from the rest, but also by articulation. And here it works. You need to do that. So and if you would tie the notes together, it wouldn't work. So, and also here, give accents. Oh, yum, bum, bum. So, yum, bum, bum, bum. How nice is that? Yum, bum, bum, dum, rum, bum, So that's for me, I cannot understand why, well, why people, knowing that there is an alternative, still would like to have this twice as fast. I mean, this is so nice as a rhythm. So here also, these notes of so the quarter notes, the length of those notes is really crucial. Listen what happens if I make them too long. Suddenly this rhythm is away. But now I make them short. Not as short as the left hand, because the left hand has has these dashes, which is actually very near to staccato. And honestly, if there is a difference between a dash and a dot, that's an ongoing debate and they will never end it, because there are inconsistencies in Czerny's writings, but also in Beethoven. So it's not up to me to say, well, that's the truth. I think there is a little bit of confusion, but there is well, both dashes and dots are shorter. Staccato is a dot, which means literally half of the value that you lose, and they were quite serious about that. The dash has about the same meaning, but perhaps with a little bit of more emphasis on the note. So you could say it's adding 5% of the portato into the staccato. So staccato plus 5% portato, that's how I feel it is the dash. That you does a little line that instead of the dot. And then also the handwriting of Beethoven. I've even seen a study analyzing, it's great actually that it exists, analyzing the ink that Beethoven used. And so you can see whenever he refilled actually his pen, so dipped in the ink, and that was regularly, because so when there was a fresh refill, so to say, of his pen, was no way he could write a dot. So it's even there a confusion. But anyway, here you have this yom pom pom ti. So the right hand a little bit longer here, but not too long, because then you have the effect that I've demonstrated. So let's try to do it right. So here it puts these dashes also, but listen, if you make it just a tiny little longer, so you hear suddenly that there is a motive ongoing in the right hand that maybe otherwise would have escaped your attention. And if you apply that in all the voices, that's actually a golden trick to make these, well, kind of polyphonic movement, polyphony, but because that's a kind of polyphony here, makes it very clear, so that you vary in length very subtly, subtle, I would say, between all the voices, which doesn't make your life easier, but certainly brings a much light and depth into the piece. Let's try that. How much? That's the obvious question of how much salt and pepper in your soup. That's up to you, actually. Accent piano. Accent. So that's great on these Viennese pianos. They are very fast in their sound production. So what you typically do on an action like this is not throw all your weight into the keyboard, but in fact, very alike as on the clavichord, you have key contact with your fingers, but instead of very firmly going down, which kind of destroys the sound, you go very briefly down, but with a lot of speed and energy, and you go out of the key. So then you have this yum, and then in this tempo, of course, which is what makes it more easy, is that you can have suddenly piano. That is something that, if you really pay attention on that, so Beethoven has a lot of these passages where he writes forte piano immediately. That's actually typical for that style, but Beethoven uses that a lot here as well. So you always need a little bit of time to adjust. If you have experimented with that, you know, and if you have not, you should, because it's a really great lesson. When you play forte, 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 even with crescendo, and then suddenly piano. And that's really hard. That's really hard. But of course, if the tempo is too high, that's for me also one of the tempo indicators that makes it impossible to make that shift suddenly. And actually, if you read Bülow's edition, he often talks about the importance of these sudden pianos. So here it's great on the piano. I should give a little bit more emphasis. And then we see here pianissimo and piano. So he goes from piano, then you have this forzando, and then diminuendo to pianissimo. So here's diminuendo, and then piano. And Beethoven apparently was very serious about the difference between piano and pianissimo. Well, you could say that's obvious, but that's not always so simple, because you have diminuendo, you go to piano in just one melody, and these pianos, these Viennese pianos, you can go, well, let me say, on the Frenzel, which is a little bit later, is much harder to go really soft. The Fritz is so incredibly precise, regulated, that it makes it easier. But still, don't expect a Viennese piano to be as sensitive to that, how would I say, to that development of sound, where you want to have the sound really, really, really soft. It always needs this action, a kind of basic energy to go into the key. Otherwise, you don't have a proper tone, you know. Steinway makes your life much easier on that. Czerny also talks about that, always to hit the key with a certain level of basic energy to have the piano basic sound okay. So, but the difference between piano and pianissimo, I'm working on that, because I tried to find out, there must have been a gradation that is really not subtle, but is really a kind of essential. Even Franz Liszt wrote about that. I don't remember where. I should look it up. It's well, make a video on that once. So he said, well, the difference between pianissimo for Beethoven was rather huge. Not to mention the difference between piano and forte. I don't know, how did he describe that? As mountains from each other, something like that. And then you have forte to fortissimo, which is reserved for the real extreme passages. Never overplay the piano in that style. That's also something you write, so I read a lot. So let's try it, Chris, and see what happens with the pianissimo. It's actually interesting. So piano, pianissimo, piano. Let's do it from here. No. So sforzando piano. You see how difficult this? No, it's jump. Also, these places must fall really on its legs. You know, the bum, 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 bum. You cannot permit yourself to miss in timing, even a millisecond there. Bum, bum. That's of course a contrast that you cannot imagine how big it is. Imagine you've never heard this piece, and then suddenly from chom chom pom. So here also lines up, a little bit of crescendo, lines down, a little bit of decrescendo. I know in many modern piano schools, so to say, I had the same when I was in Amsterdam. You have a tendency to go against this. It's a tradition. When you have lines up, go a little bit crescendo. When you have lines down, go a little bit decrescendo. But it's actually something that was really, I think, authentic from that time. Referring to Czerny again, he writes that. He also says that you can do the opposite. When you go up, just decrease and also go softer. Something that he learned from Beethoven, and he said Beethoven applied that effect with great effect. So, but here he also writes in his pianoforte school to emphasize or accentuate also the high note. I would say also the lowest note. So they have this nice melody. So, pam pam, pam pam. Legato or not? That would be a great question. I think it's a little bit non-legato. So I think, but I of course don't know. I cannot ask Beethoven or Czerny that if they wanted to have that legato in that time, so we are still in the 18th century here, they would have written legato. But I think, yeah, it technically that works great on this piano. The fingering of Czerny is another indicator for me. So if you have this triad, that's of course no problem. Then you come down. You have here the first finger on the E. Then you go with the third finger on the B. You might say, well, that's normal fingering. Yes, of course it is. But if you want to play that legato and no pedaling here, well, that's the third part. Then you have to really bend your hand over the thumb, like in a way I don't think in the 18th century people did. So they had still their hand in a kind of position, like if you grab an orange, that's still today, if you learn piano in kind of traditional piano schools, that they let you grab an orange actually to have this hand position, but that's the real 18th century hand position. The only thing that those people, like in that time, certainly Beethoven was part of that. It developed this technique in this way of playing, that opening the hand felt really uncomfortable, and so really going over your first fingers so much that you can play the E with the first finger and then go to the B with the third finger and still play legato. I don't think they did. If you want to do that, there is another fingering that might work better. It's 5-3-2. So you go 5-3-2, and then you just shift your hand off. You replace your hand to an octave lower. And if you release a G sharp very soft, very nicely, you wouldn't even notice that it is. And then it's possible. But Czerny didn't write that fingering. That's again a reason why this score is so important, this edition. And I really need to find a way to the other school, maybe write to the Beethoven house in Bonn. I haven't done. They must have all of that scanned, hopefully. But then I wonder why it's not on the IMSLP. They share everything, but Petrucci Library. So if you if you know somewhere some links that I don't know about, so please send them to me. I'm really looking out for these Simrock editions. A few of them I was lucky to buy 20 years ago for almost nothing, and a few are given to me by Lorenz. So this is a score that originally was owned by Lorenz, but even he has trouble finding it. So here, this fingering seems an indicator for me for non-legato, not really like in the 18th century, but very, I think later they would write leggero here. Then use of the pedal or not, that's a great question. I cannot answer that. I think this is a place where you, according to the textbook, so to say, you can use the pedal, but no problem because you have one chord and you have just, that's actually really the basic definition of when can you use the pedal. So the sustaining pedal, that's when you have a bass note, that's one harmony, and everything that happens on top of that is actually allowed in that style to be within the harmonic fog or smoke, well, how do you want, a cloud of that one bass note. But here even you have a perfect A minor harmony. So notice what happens, you start to play faster. That's typically when you use the pedal. So yeah, Beethoven did not indicate that. He did not indicate a lot of pedal here. I actually don't know if he added any signs of pedal because I think he did that only later. And which is the first sonata he used the sign of the pedal, because 1793 is really early for pedal indications. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that, well, it escapes my mind. There is a sonata and it's known. I should know that actually. It should be on. But you are here in a time where pedal, so the sustaining pedal indication is not actually indicated. So what to do about it? In this time, Beethoven had his Walter piano were knee levers. Not with pedals, you could just activate the damping system by pushing your knees up. They were underneath the piano. So yeah, I like this on this piano also without sustaining pedal, because then you have this possibility of bringing out in a more subtle way the upper and the lower notes. So like this. Forzando. Same. So here you have ya da 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 dum bum dum dum. So you make there, I think, the bridge to the new segment by giving a little bit stretch on the second beat. Yum 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 yum. So. Dum bum yum. Yeah, that's a great piece actually. So, well, I think I'm going to play that without use of the pedal. Czerny also doesn't write about that in his pianoforte school, but he doesn't. I mean, he sometimes you will read in his Opus 500, so his pianoforte school third part, in which he speaks amongst other things about performance practice, but also on the proper way to play the Beethoven sonatas. Sometimes you will read that he advises to make use of the sustaining pedal in a nice way, but here he doesn't. So yeah, and it gives this again this possibility. It's maybe the clavichord player who's talking now, but to work with your fingers and to make everything you want with fingers only. And yeah, that worked actually great on this piano. So yeah, that was a scherzo. I see it's about an hour that we are in this live stream with all the little troubles that we had at the beginning. And by the way, the first, when I played it first, was the best. That's typically when you start working on it, you kind of take the piece out of balance. Everything needs to come together again, but that needs time. You're thinking about things and you want to do those things, and that sometimes it's not matching with each other. You should make those things that you want to do actually your own, and then do it within the boundaries of the movement that you've set. The movement is more important than the tempo. Tempo is your own choice. I made the choice to just experiment for years now with the metronome numbers, with the tempi given to us by those people. But regardless of what tempo you choose, you have to make sure that at the end you have a movement where you can build everything upon. That's the most important thing. The piece has to you have little energy boosts possibilities, so to say. At the beginning of the bar, you give a little bit of accent. So all these things are, you know, it's like a train who's moving, but you have the possibility to give it a little bit of push every once in a while, but it's not too much. So those little pushes should allow that movement of that train or music, whatever, to keep going, and actually keep going in a kind of steady way. So that's the importance of a movement. That's also the reason why tempo is so important, because that's actually the only parameter that you can measure. You cannot say how long do I make that note exactly compared to what the computers should do. You cannot note this down as this. That's like the salt and pepper in your soup. You have to taste. You have to develop your taste, but your tempo you can measure. But your movement is the layer underneath your tempo. It's defining everything, and all the things that you think about, you want to apply, you think it's important, needs to sync so that it's being absorbed in this movement layer. And once it starts, it seems all to be natural and logical and in a balanced way that you, as a listener, would say, well, there is nothing I can change about it. It's a complete story, and that's the difficulty of being a musician. And so I've said it before, but inserting then a tempo decision that's made by someone else into that process is not making your life easier. That's also the reason I think why, if you're not really serious about this tempo reconstruction and you just try it to try it, but not really convinced to try it out, I think many people will just sit down and say, let's see if it works. Well, it will not work, because you have to keep searching for this balance. You have to make that tempo absorbed by your movement, and that's the tricky thing sometimes. In many cases, it will be a very smooth process, which will not cause you very much difficulty. Like in this scherzo, I think that's not so big of a deal to play it in double beat or whole beat. But some more movements, slow movements, sometimes not. Sometimes you will say slow movements, oh yeah, now I see the notation, I see it's meant for that. But yeah, you have to be serious about that if you really want to try these things out. And don't hesitate when you do that. Don't try to solve the mystery. It's not a mystery. Everything in music, by definition, should be easy and should be simple and should be directly applicable. So no difficult thought processes and all of this. Also, the metronome theory is just this binary unity. That's it. That's up and down. That's everything. temperament the same thing. Don't I wouldn't analyze all the. I mean, it's fascinating to read that. I mean, I love those stories, and I can really imagine how enthusiastic those, I forgot the name of the Bradley Lehman must have been when he analyzed those scrolls and sees that actually there is a temperament coming out. But it's not so complicated, I think, than that. It should always be simple at the end. And that's, I think, a good guideline to reconstruct things from the past, to always think first from the logical side and not from the conspiracy side. There must have been something in Bach's mind writing the well-tempered clavier that we don't see today. And what is then between brackets is, but we will never accept equal temperament, which the sources overwhelmingly point to with the well-tempered clavier. That's the other thing. We are sometimes a little bit biased towards history because, yeah, we have our own history. And that's with all of us, also with me. And it's no escape from that. And that's the fascinating thing that we, but now I'm rambling just as if it was a regular video. That's a fascinating thing that, you know that actually you must realize that we will never, ever reconstruct 100% what Beethoven had in mind. It's impossible. That time is over. It's gone. We have that with the Fritz piano here. Joris and I, we talked about that many times. Also, he said, well, I'm reconstructing now a process that just was in that time, the context of the time. I'm reinventing things that just was an industry in that time. We delivered certain parts in the right way. No questions asked. It was what it was in that time. So we were reconstructing something in a way that's, well, our fingertips are just still a little bit reaching to that time. But in music playing, I'm really convinced that if we would listen, we would have the benefit of hearing those people play. It would be a really shock. Sometimes for the worse, but I think a lot of times if we would open our minds for that, for the better. It must have been amazing to hear Beethoven play. And I've always wondered, what's the musician I would like to hear back? And I don't know, actually. For a long time, it was Mendelssohn. I think Mendelssohn must have been an amazing musician. But then comes Chopin to mind. And wouldn't we love to hear Mozart play or Beethoven? But yeah, how cool is it that we can, well, just actually fantasize about it. I'm just adjusting my microphone to be in the chat for you in a little while. And see if I missed some things here. John, I see you. I would use a bit of pedal, maybe at the pedal point. It's as it's called, but not pedal all the way through. Yeah, and if you play on a modern piano, I would certainly give a little bit of just touching pedal there. Jason has a few questions. So yeah, so just to finish that point of pedaling, you have to translate that music on a modern grand or a modern piano. You have to. It's not written for that. Even the Fritz has a damping system that we are thinking about it. It's super light compared even to the Frenzel, which is already a light piano, but it's earlier. It's the dampers are very light and not always capable of damping the piano really 100%. Here it's made to do that. Question is if that's original. That's the big deal. We don't know. Even changing the material of the felt is making the damper work better or worse, and there is actually no indication of what felt they used at the time. So it's amazing how many details. That's the reason why I haven't played the Fritz. We have to make so many decisions, and I'm playing on it now to allow those decisions to be organically happen, and that takes time. Okay, Jason. Jason asks, are there any sources that describe tempo inequalities relating to the metronome? Also, could you explain the rest of the juice source and what he says later in the book about ternary pendulum use? I should read that then first. Yes, we have a wonderful source. I will bring that. It's by a certain Danel, a Frenchman, 1860. So he connects the exact way as, so you remember that source Ju, but Swoboda I mentioned in the video with the apple, with the pendulum. That's actually the most important source we have on whole beat. It's so explicitly describing whole beat that there is no escape of interpretation. But the same interpretation or the same description as, you have the tact, so the tempo. This Mr. Danel, he says, for instance, in the full 4-time signature, you have the tons in French and you have the unities, which strangely enough, he sees the 8th notes. But that's actually something that Edvard Joux is describing the same way. So you have the tons and the unity. Tons, 1 quarter note, 2 binary unities, unité. So 2, and what you do actually is every quarter note you go like, you actually, like a pendulum, indicate the 8th notes when you want to define, so to say, the quarter notes. And it's an instruction for a class of students. So they go on 1 and 2 and 3. Actually, we do that still today. And then he makes the transition to, if you stand for an orchestra, you conduct the tons. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. But still, he says, you have to keep in mind 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And then he makes a remarkable statement, but again, I will bring that in the footnote, saying, if that's too difficult for you or for your students, then let them use the similar way as the metronome takes the tempo. 1 and 2 and so that's a superior source. I mean, even superior to Edvard Joux. I mean, yeah, not saying everything is solved with that, but that source is 100% giving the whole beat practice described in a very, very explicit way. And those sources come if Lawrence has a day off. I always have a mailbox with links like that. It's just looking on internet, and sometimes you have to be lucky, but there is so much out there that nobody has read in 100 years. So who has heard from Danel? Okay, Jason asks, Wim, in that article they mentioned that musicians used finger pedaling a lot. Could that be applied to the sonatas? Yeah, sure. So finger pedaling, I have to, during one of the Patreon calls, I was taught what finger pedaling was. It's actually holding notes longer in order to emphasize those. Yeah, all the time. In Bach's music, in Mozart music. So if Mozart writes, don't play it like that. Of course, you make melodies all the time. Yeah, sure, do that. Beethoven, yeah, sure, yeah. Okay. So, Jason, another question. Do you think that in Bach's day the organ playing was the same as other keyboard technique like articulation and accentuation? That's a great question. I should give this some time to think about. If you play the organ, I think it's very related to the clavichord. That's for sure. So I've played a long time the organ, and then of course a long time the clavichord. Is it completely the same? I don't think so. Like this finger pedaling thing, that's much less on an organ. That's for sure. You don't hold the notes that long because obviously the notes is sounding all the way through on the clavichord. That's a great thing. Sometimes I have a discussion with Joris. He's, of course, as an instrument maker, trying to make the instrument with the longest notes. I mean, the longer the instrument sounds, the better quality the instrument generally is. I said, but yeah, stop with that because it makes my life harder. The sooner it stops, The more clarity I can give with just the dynamic difference, but that's of course something that you have to, both are important. But on an organ, that's not possible. It's a great question, but I should give this, I should think about this. Accentuation on organ happens with finger pedaling on the other, contrary to what I said, just so holding the note a little bit longer gives an enormous accent on an organ. Also, a good organ, an historical organ, and actually we were making I'm organ consultant in two great new organ building projects that are copying organs of Heinrich Andreas Contius, but not only copying, we're copying the process that Contius worked with. So Contius was a Wagner student, Silbermann is that style, it's great Bach school, so to say. But the alloy of the metal, the way the metal is cast, the way that that's so important. The alloy is made, so the impurities that you have there, and then suddenly you come to an organ pipe where the speech, even without voicing, harmonizing, is actually so incredibly powerful that it allows the player to, with the speech, not the speech, with the speed of the touch, to make the pipe sound directly with this ground tone or with the fifth, which makes a lot of difference. It's hard to say, but that's what makes an organ dynamic. Only the best organs will give you that. Almost all the old 18th century organs that are more or less intact still have that. And then you give accents by just playing with the speech and with the speed of the speech of those organ pipes, together with, of course, lengthening the notes a tiny little bit. So, like on the clavichord, everything you do on the organ it's a big machine, but in that time, the smallest details give enormous results. I might play the organ in the future a little bit more with the projects that are coming to an end, and it, would be ridiculous not to do, because, I miss the organ sometimes a little bit, to be honest, but don't say anyone. Okay, my chat is just jumping back and forth. John will be working on the time machine. That was great. Martin Bennett, question to Wim about metronome marks. Do you know of any metronome marks for early 19th century songs? It would be obvious if your tempo seems to be 100% wrong. Yes, and actually we have quite some, but I don't have them. Lourdes has to resend them. He found a lot of them. And it's quite obvious. It's quite obvious if you have. He gave some examples, but I make a Trello list that's actually in a way of indexing things, that I don't forget things, or a OneNote. So if people send ideas, I throw them in there, that I don't forget them, because that's one of the problems, to note things down, that I refine them. But there were songs that were really known still today that, like for instance, that we have in tempo like double as fast as we sing it today. Also sur le pont d'Avignon, on y danse, how is that melody? It escapes me. So really popular melodies back then, also now, and it's obvious. We have, for instance, I will bring that source on Lucy, late 19th century, who actually makes a case for tempo reconstruction. Tempo reconstruction, not reconstruction. How to find your tempo if you don't have a metronome. That's a little bit similar to Benjamin Carr, that source. But he is, in a way, much more explicit. He also says how to double tempo and things like that. I will bring that source. It's really cool. And he uses the song Au clair de la lune, which in that time, in the 60s or 70s, was sung by everyone. And Lorenz told me he actually in Switzerland learned that song in when he was 5 or 6 years old. And so the oldest recording we have, he metronomizes that at quarter note 60. but then obviously you have to think, well, it must be 8 notes 60 because, and I'm not going to explain that, I will explain that in the video. There is only one way in which this doubling of tempo works. That's if you apply whole beat, but then it becomes 8 notes 60, which is for that song really slow. But then the oldest recording on earth from a man's voice is made in 1860, exactly with that song, and you can guess what tempo that it's sung. It's same area, by the way, as Lucy, the same period, same time, and it's 8 notes 60. So that's actually one of the most beautiful showcases for double beats. Yeah, to find time to bring all those videos, but they'll come, they'll come. So Miriam, very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for being here. It's a little bit longer than 1 hour, but that's, yeah. Jason. So there's John with his time machine. Rock, why do you use the phone's metronome and not the wooden one? Is there any difference apart from being easy to use? I use the wooden one a lot, but it's sometimes, certainly at this side of the piano, not always very regular. I can show you. Let's see what it does now. Now it's perfect. Sometimes it's a little bit, certainly when the spring is a little bit at the end, it's jang, jang. So strangely enough, it still gives the time. Probably because I listen to it in whole beat, jang, jang. But sometimes it's a little bit off. I use it digital, not in tempo. Let's check here. Let's just check real time. 76, which it should have. What you will see is that after a while, there is a little bit of differentiation. Let's see if this is jang, jang. No. So that's, I would say that's amazing how accurate this metronome is. But I use a digital app also a lot to check my tempo. So you have a thing to tap on, you see tap tempo, and if you tap on it, you can check your tempo easily. That's the reason. And if I practice exercises or studies, I often play them with the metronome, and that's simply annoying to have to rewind that. So it's just a matter of habit. And also a little bit, if I use that metronome and it ticks a little bit irregular, you can imagine what happens in the chat box. Obviously, my metronome is off. But it's not, I've checked that. It's actually amazing how accurate it is. Okay. Theoretically, musical, you should consider playing and recording Mendelssohn's Spring Song. Yeah, that would be great. We are actively thinking on inviting more musicians on the channel. It's sometimes hard because they have to out themselves as even slightly, partly double beat or whole beat a believer. It's not about belief, it's about facts. But and how cool is it that we can experiment? It's free of cost, Yeah, Jason says Grieg's piano concertos metronome numbers are in single beat but are whole beat range. Well, I would like to see that. There's a lot of fuss about Grieg because he recorded on some acoustical recordings. Not that I know everything about it, but I know they were made directly from, you have these big horns, and was a stylus making the recording into the grooves, actually, into a lacquer, but that was driven by someone. The lacquer was not accurate enough, so you have a lot of speed problems, really a lot. And if you dive into the recordings made by Grieg, you will find actually that they restored them some to the metronome numbers in single beat, which is not hard, but also some to double beat, whole beat. So I don't know, but I really don't know. I really don't know. Miriam said, if you would have a connection with the microphone, I could sing. Yeah, great. And then, if you go to the time of the piano rolls also a topic that I don't know a lot about, but what I do know, someone reached out to me and said, well, apparently these recordings were made and then an engineer actually copied that original one on a second. He cleaned up all the wrong notes, made it so that the timing problems were corrected, and so on and so on. And a lot of those piano rolls don't have a real time indication, but if they have, they had the choice what to do. So yeah, it is partly an important source, but in many cases, but again, that's something I don't know really a lot about, is are the recordings that are made of that restored to the metronome indication? So yeah, how accurate is that as a source? I don't know. There comes Anya down with our little puppy. Okay, she wrote it. Okay, we were going to wrap up here. It's
He has to go.
he
I
has to
can't
go.
wait.
Okay, okay, guys. I hope you liked this session. It was a little bit strange beginning with all the technical problems, and then my mother-in-law needed something. So, but that's happening with live streams. And I think this Scherzo, that's a great piece. So I hope you like that. Thanks for being here. Thanks also to my patrons. I'm always saying that, but it's really important. They're really supporting the channel in an amazing way, and they keep me going beyond those barriers, because you have a lot in time, in production, in things that you know, but they are there to support me every time and to say, hey, keep going, keep up the good work. And they're throwing in a few dollars, which is also helping with the equipment, with the time I can spend. So if you have some time to go over that Patreon page once, I would appreciate that a lot. And also, if you want to get notifications for the live stream or these premieres at the clavichord, don't forget to hit the bell icon. And I think on mobile, sometimes on, I don't know, some browsers on the PC as well, hit also the choose the notification that you want. So hit all notification if you really want to have a notification for the live streams, because otherwise YouTube will not send you, which I don't understand. I understand it partly, but it's what it is. So then we can hang out like we're doing now. Okay, and now it's time for me to drink something because I'm really thirsty. And I will see you again tomorrow in the Moonlight Sonata. I'm really looking forward to what you think about that. And Wednesday, that's a video I will be recording tomorrow about the Moonlight Sonata, a little bit of very small masterclass, so to say. I will show you the moderator and the things that I'm doing with that piece, tempo reconstruction, but also the interpretation, the things that have been written about it. And Thursday will be the practicing session. Friday we'll have the Czerny etude, excuse me. Saturday, perhaps again, some whole beat impressions, all under the one condition that I have time to make all those videos, which is fun for me to do, but I have to find time sometimes, which is not always easy. But anyway, that's the schedule for this week. And you know what? It's great to share all of that with you, and it's great to have you here. So thank you for everything. And now, see you next time.